Hi guys, it's Jazz. I just wanted to create this series, Languages Explained, just as a way to give beginners a sense of what you need to know or what are the basic things that if you don't learn anything else in a language, these are the things you really need to know. So for the first episode, I want to start off with German because I've been teaching that the longest for the past year, more than anything else. But basically German, it can be complicated for any beginner to really look at it. When you look at it from first glance, you're thinking, at least from an English speaker's perspective, it looks like a bunch of typos to me. So once you kind of figure it out and you learn the basics, you kind of understand the structure of the language. So really and truly, I want to give you the sense of the foundation. If you don't learn anything else in German, these are the things you have to know. Like, they are very crucial into being able to move forward in your language learning journey, specifically with German. So basically, we're gonna get started with that right now. So the first thing you really need to go over is pronunciation. So when you start learning what words mean, you're gonna eventually learn how to pronounce letters, because letters are basically symbols for sounds, and there's sounds together make words and words together make sentences. So basically there's some things you need to know about these particular letters. So the letter R. The letter R is pronounced similar in the way that particularly French pronounces their R's, where it's from the back of the throat. So if you're trying to say to someone, oh, gute Reise, as example, have a good trip. You know, the word for Reise, trip or voyage, is basically going to have that R that's in the back of the throat. Gute Reise. Also, the same sound will be found in the CH, the CH. Those two letters will create the sound as well. So, if you're trying to say, I speak 4 languages. Ich spreche sind 4 Sprachen. You're going to hear that. It sometimes will sound a little bit harder depending on the vowel that comes before it. So that will either soften it, or it will either, it'll either soften it, or it will either make it kind of harsher. So the next thing is the letter S. S. It's really hilarious because the letter S is not even pronounced that way. It's pronounced as a Z. So if you're trying to say the word to see, like I can see, ich kann sehen, it wouldn't be sehen, it would be sehen with the letter Z. And then the only time it actually will sound like an S is if it's with an S set, which is basically that little beta looking symbol that people often see. So that is going to be what we call a sharp S. And then that one, if you don't have the S set symbol on your computer or your phone, you can basically put 2 S's and it will basically mean the same thing. And then also the letter S, paired with the CH or paired with a T or a P, is going to have a sh sound, like shh. We're in the library. No, like when you say the word for to play, spielen, spielen, or if you're trying to say like Frühstück, breakfast, or if you're trying to say the word Schuhe, shoe, it's gonna have that same sound, sh. So an S by itself is a Z, and then basically compared with other vowels or other consonants, it's typically gonna be sh. And then basically, if it's an S set, then it's a S. Then it actually sounds like an S. But then it doesn't even look like an S. And then here's another thing that's confusing, is sometimes the sounds of the letters get switched and swapped and all that other good stuff. So the other thing is like the letter W, as most people know, is pronounced as a V, but then the letter V is pronounced as an F. And an F is just sounds like an F. So like when you see the word Volkswagen, which is basically a German-based company, if you were to pronounce that in the actual German pronunciation, it would be Volkswagen. And I would also say to think of like the fact that the V and the F, they still have the same sound. Just think of it just the same way in English. We have the F and then we have the PH sound. It's still the same thing. Just one has 2 different letters and one has just 1 letter by itself. So either way, it's the same sound. Another thing, vowel combinations. So sometimes people kind of skip over this, they don't really pay close attention to it. But when you see the word, any word that has a vowel combination such as I, I, or I, backwards. So basically, when it is an E and an I, then it would be I, like ice cream, I. ice. Or if you basically are talking about like when I said the word spielen or Spiel, which is basically a game, then you would say it would be an I and an E is I. Spielen. The next thing that's confusing is genders. Because if you're a person who's already had experience learning French or Spanish or Italian or Portuguese or other Latin-based languages, you would know that the genders are typically masculine and feminine. Every noun has a masculine and feminine article or adjectives that correspond with the gender of the noun. But in German, they want to take it up another notch. Because 2 genders is not enough. We got to throw neutral in there. So basically, it's a little bit trickier because it's what I already knew, like masculine and feminine. Now I have to learn a whole other gender. Like it's really, again, I feel like you more so learn it as you go. Like when you read stuff and you basically get exposed to vocabulary, you start picking up what words sound best with what article. I think so. That's why I never really teach vocabulary, because vocabulary is something you can pick up as you go. It's just a matter of learning the basics of how words are structured together and how they're pronounced, so you can actually say something that actually makes sense. So your definite articles are going to be der, die, and das. Männlich, weiblich, und sässlich, or Nuta. I usually say Nuta, but sässlich is another way of saying that. Then you have the indefinite articles, which is ein, eine, and ein. There are certain ways that you can actually tell, I think, by the endings of certain words, whether they're going to be masculine or feminine or neutral. In certain cases. I also have a video linked below also so that you can find that out, so in more details. I will say that mainly American words, or any word that usually comes from typically English words, they are going to be automatically neutral. There are exceptions, but generally they're going to be neutral. Okay, cases. So this is a little bit of a tricky part, because I had a student where we spent a lot of time going over this, because this is, again, I kind of expect this because there's 4 cases and they basically determine what you're talking about in a sentence, like who said what, who did this, who was affected by something that someone else said, where something is, or which belongs to who. It's kind of confusing, but really and truly it's simple. It's just a matter of getting used to seeing it on a regular basis. I will say, however, that Germans really like to switch up word order. So sometimes it's like you can make a question, it's like you can switch up words, and even though it means the same thing in English, but if we were to switch up words in a sentence the way Germans do, I'm pretty sure you would think that English doesn't make any sense. But Germans, they can do that because they're of the fact that they have 4 cases. So everyone knows who's talking about what. So the first you have is nominative. Nominative is going to be the subject of the sentence. Who is doing what? So basically the subject, if I was talking about me, I would say ich. Ich is the nominative for me in the sentence. So I'm the subject of the sentence because I'm the one performing the action with whatever verb and so on within the sentence. Then you also have accusative. Accusative is like the direct object. Who is being affected by the subject? So like, for example, if you're trying to say I like ice cream, in English we would never say me like ice cream, because me is the direct object pronoun for me. It's just like I is the nominative. So it's like I would say I like ice cream, but if somebody did something to me, I would say you hurt me. Like when you said that, you hurt me. Like, or if you're trying to say I heard you, ich höre dich. Dich is the accusative form of you informally. So ich, I'm the subject, nominative, and dich is the accusative, is the direct object that is affected by the subject, me. Dative is really, I felt like for me it took the longest to really master, but even though sometimes I still, even to this day, don't really feel like I have it fully mastered. But anyway, dative is more like the way of saying, if you're talking about time, like if you're gonna meet up at a certain hour, or if you are at a certain position, every time you see a preposition, you are always going to use dative for the noun or the object object person afterwards. So if I was in a sentence where to say, ich war im Museum, I was in the museum, I would use im, which is basically a contraction of in and dem. I was in the museum, but you would just contract it and it would say im Museum. Im Museum. Lastly is Genitiv. Genitiv, I've asked friends about this and really it's rarely used, which is why I don't teach it to beginners. It's basically shown for possession. Like if you're trying to say like if you're trying to answer the question Wessen is like a question where you're saying like whose is this? Like whose book is this? Whose arm is this? Basically, genitive is like when you use if you're trying to show possession of something, typically. I never really see it used outside of that. So that's all I will really say. And to be honest with you, I think it's really not worth learning right off the bat, unless you're going to be in some region that somehow like uses it often. Like I know that I was watching a video that said that in Bavaria they typically will use genitive more than standard or Hochdeutsch, which I actually have a link to a linguistic video about that as well. So now that we're talking about pronouns, I want to talk about the 3 Z's. So not the letter Z, but the pronoun, because you'll see it in 3 different forms. So you have to really pay attention to context in speaking, and you have to pay attention to the context of the sentence if you are reading something. So for example, Z can be 3rd person she, like she has my bag, sie hat meine Tasche. Or if you're trying to talk about Sie in the form of they, sie haben. That. But then Sie also means you formally speaking. So if I was talking to you formally, like Herr or Frau, like Herr and Frau, like Mr. and Mrs., that's the other thing. Frau has like 3 different meanings. It means woman, but it can also mean wife, but it can also mean Mrs. So you really have, it just depends on the context. You can use it in multiple different ways. So when you're talking about you formally speaking, like with Herr or Frau, whoever, you're gonna notice that the Z is capitalized. The other 2 will be lowercase. And also all the pronouns are never capitalized unless it begins the sentence. So with Z, you really have to pay attention. If it's at the beginning of the sentence, you're gonna have to really pay attention to which is which. It's like which is which. It really, Z in the form of she is going to be a completely different conjugation. Z with they and you formally speaking, those are going to have the same exact conjugation. So you really have to see, okay, does this have a capitalized pronoun? Hope that makes sense. Processing. Okay, the next thing I'm going to touch on very quickly is numbers. Numbers are very straightforward, okay? So you have your first 10. Every time I learn a new language, it's the same thing. You learn the first 10 and then the next ones after like 11, 12, and all the way to 20 and beyond, there's just a pattern that repeats. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I don't know what it is, but across almost all the languages that I speak, 11 and 12 are just kind of like these weird outcasts, because I always get like the one that's like outside of the pattern of 11, 12, and then after that it's like 13, 14, 15. Then it just starts repeating. And here's the thing that kind of gets weird. After you get to 20, 20, it's like you start basically adding and then it's backwards. So if you have the word 21, it's 21, 1 and 20. 21, 22, 23, 24, and so on. And when you get to 30, 30, 31. It goes on and on. So it's basically you're having, I think they do something like that in the Bible where it's like they had 3 and 600 horses, or I don't know, something like that. So numbers are kind of just really brief. I mean, everything is just kind of simple. You just memorize the first 10, and basically from there you just kind of start counting. Okay, with speaking and writing, you're always going to notice differences, because when people are writing, they tend to be able to actually think and then write it out. Whereas when you're speaking, like in this instance of where I'm at right now, I'm basically just talking and also thinking of what I'm going to say at the same time. And so sometimes I say more words than I would if I was writing this all out. So the first thing you're really going to notice is that with past tense, anytime you talk about past tense, people are typically going to speak with the perfect form than they are likely to use Präteritum, even though Präteritum is shorter. So if I was trying to say I thought about something, I would say, like in Präteritum, I would say ich dachte. Ich dachte, like I thought. But in perfect, I would say ich habe etwas gedenkt, like I have something thought of. I don't know, it's kind of weird because with perfect, especially if you have two verbs in the same, the auxiliary verb haben oder sein, to be, to have or to be, typically you're going to find those as in the second position. You have the subject, like I, ich, and then there's whatever the conjugation of that is, which is ich habe, and then if you're trying to say I thought of something, you would say ich habe etwas gedenkt. It's like I have something thought. That's basically what it translates to. So the second verb goes to the end instead of the third position, as typically you would see in English. Okay. Also, and same thing with any language, is you're going to notice that as you start learning or getting exposure to German, you're going to notice that when you listen to native speakers, just like we do in our language, is you have a tendency to drop off letters or blend certain sounds. So like when you think of the word, as I mentioned, ich habe, that means I have. But sometimes when people speak really quickly, or if you're listening to music, you might notice that someone might say ich hab. It's easier than saying ich habe. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's great to know pronunciation first thing, because once you learn pronunciation, you can be lazy, you know? So it's like when I'm saying I'm going to go to the store, I would really never say that. I would say I'm gonna go to the store. That's standard, you know? Or if you're saying like, sometimes people drop off G's in words that end in ing, like I'm going to the store, it's I'm going to the store. Depending on where you are in the United States, you'll most likely hear that. Also, it's really common to see subjects getting dropped off. So when you're texting people, it's common to be like, oh, if someone asks me like, oh, wie geht's? Like, how's it going? I can respond by, ich bin okay, bin okay. Instead of saying ich bin, I could just say bin okay. I can text that, it's fine. Another thing is the word ja. Ja basically means yes in German. So we know it as like ja oder nein, yes or no. But really in these cases, you can really use ja interchangeably. I remember I asked someone, a friend of mine, I said, when is your birthday? And he said that it was like some date that was like 2 months prior to that. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? And he said, hast ja nicht gefragt. Like, which basically means, it's basically he dropped off the du, but it would be du hast ja nicht gefragt. Like, you have not, like you somehow, like you just never asked. I don't know why ja is in there as that, in that context, but that's what I interpret it as. Yeah. And then basically I remember there was another time I asked him for some advice, or actually no, I asked him about something about his language, and he said something, and I thanked him for the fact that he helped me, and I remember he said, ich bin ja für dich da, which I'm interpreting it as saying like, oh, I'm there for you. But then again, I never translate languages word for word because sometimes things don't make sense word for word. So even though there's ja, it means yes, you could also kind of use it in different ways to say like, kind of like, so, or yeah, like of course, in certain cases. That's what I've kind of seen it as. I think that German is very similar to English when you think about pronunciation. It sounds a little bit different, but when you think about it, like the word, like for the word subject is subjekt. It looks like English, just misspelled. At least to us it is. But for the most part, similar to English. I remember hearing that about 10% of the German language, like 10% of the words in the language, actually come from English. And it kind of makes sense because we're all Germanic languages anyway. There's English, there's German, then there's Dutch and whatnot and what have you. And so basically, when you think about it, we all kind of are cut from the same cloth. It's just that we all, over time and history and wars and things like that, we just break off and we have our own dialects. I mean, then in some cases we create our own languages. So there's that. So just even some cultural notes is that I think that Germans are really great people to get to know because they're very open and honest people. Like, you never really have to guess like what they're thinking. So like if you're like dating someone or married to one, it's like, hey babe, do these make me look fat? Yeah, they kind of do. So but that's like their honest opinion. Whereas like in America, it's like we expect like fake compliments, like, oh no, like it's kind of like, you know, like when people make those like questions just to like fish for compliments. But Germans don't do that. It's not their thing. And then also, they're very punctual. So if you really want to do business with someone who actually means business, then you'll also notice that they're always on time, if not early, and don't leave them waiting because they'll be like, why were you late? And if you're going to be late, make sure you tell them before you get there. Like, you don't want to be like in the car and it's like 10 minutes past and like, where are you? Oh, I was running late because of this. They're like, well, why didn't you tell me you were going to be late before you were actually late? I don't really know, but you know, it kind of makes sense to me, but you know, it's just who they are. I think they're also really intelligent people, so at least when I speak German, I feel like I'm intelligent, even if what I'm saying completely doesn't make any sense sometimes. And I also discovered that there's this thing called Biergarten. I don't know, someone explained this to me, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, you go to kind of like an orchard like setting, and it's like all these benches and you actually just sit there and you drink beer or something like that. It's kind of like, you know, what you do at wineries, except it's not a winery, it's just beer. I don't know. And there's probably food and whatnot, but I mean, that's basically, I never heard of that until now, so that's something I didn't really know. That might be something I want to try out if I ever go to Germany. Well, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful just to give you an overview of what to really expect when starting to learn German, because I know in some cases it can feel complicated, but I hope that this kind of lays it out so that you can understand what you really need to spend more time focusing on. The foundation is really, really important because once you start getting into like B1 or B2, you want to be able to come in with some really good habits, particularly with pronunciation and really being able to nail those 4 cases. I really strongly recommend that anyone who may have trouble with that, you know, or in that area, spend more time working on that. I have some resources below to really help you on your language learning journey on a day-to-day basis, because I do know that it's really important that even though it's great to have 15 minutes of Duolingo every day, and I'm not knocking it, I would just say that it's really important to find ways and resources to get exposed to real French, like French. This is what happens when you're multilingual. You forget which language you're talking about. Yeah. So basically, when you're learning German, you want to be able to get exposed to it on a day-to-day basis of what actual German sounds like with native speakers. One of the things that was really tough for me when I was looking up resources for this, or at least for our website, is that when I'm trying to find podcasts for Germans, like, I mean, what actual Germans are listening to, I get podcasts for German learners. I'm like, no, I don't want German learner podcasts. I want to know what actual Germans are listening to. So it's really important to get exposure as much as you can on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next episode, and auf Wiedersehen.